Walk into pretty much any corporate meeting and you'll eventually hear it.
Oh, yeah.
Someone is pitching a new workflow or, talking about some tech startup's fanatic employee base, and they just casually throw out the phrase, oh, they really drank the Kool-Aid.
Right. It's everywhere.
We use it constantly. It serves as this convenient shorthand for gullibility, like a quick way to describe someone buying into a bad idea or blindly following a charismatic leader.
Yeah, it basically functions as a cultural punchline. It's a way to distance ourselves from behavior that we deem irrational.
But that is exactly the problem we are tackling today. Because when you look at the source material behind that phrase, it becomes deeply unsettling.
Very.
First of all, it's actually factually incorrect.
Bang.
The compound didn't even use Kool-Aid. They used a cheap knockoff called Flavor Aid.
Right, which is a detail most people miss.
But far more importantly, that phrase just violently reduces one of the most complex, agonizing, and terrifying events in modern history into a joke.
It does. It really does.
It entirely erases the coercion, the sheer physical exhaustion, and the calculated psychological warfare that ultimately led to the deaths of over 900 people. It just flattens the reality of Jonestown.
Which is exactly why our mission for this deep dive is to reconstruct that reality.
Yes.
We're pulling apart a stack of incredibly intense source material today. We have a comprehensive historical breakdown of Jim Jones and the People's Temple.
And we've got some heavy sociological analysis, too.
Justly. We're drawing specifically from Judith Mary Waitman's seminal book, Making Sense of the Jonestown Suicides. And finally, we are examining the actual FBI transcript of the final audio recording from that day.
The death tape.
Yeah, widely known as the death tape, officially designated as Q042.
We really want to get past the caricature of the, crazy cult, because writing them off as a bunch of brainwashed lunatics does us a massive disservice.
It's too easy.
It is. It makes us miss the terrifying mechanics of how a movement that genuinely started with intentions of social justice and racial equality,
right,
mutated into a paranoid death camp. We want to understand the architecture of that mutation.
And to map out that architecture, we really have to employ a core sociological concept that will guide our entire journey today. It's a principle called Verstehen.
Verstehen. Okay, what is that?
It's a German term popularized by the sociologist Max Weber, and it roughly translates to understanding or interpretive understanding.
Got it.
Weber argued that to truly analyze human behavior, you cannot just observe it from the outside. You have to understand the subjective meaning that the individuals themselves attach to their actions.
Right.
And Waitman applies this directly to Jonestown. She argues we can't rely on the comforting assumption that these people were just fundamentally broken or, not like us.
To get into their heads.
Exactly. We have to dive into their complex of meaning. We must understand how, within the specific social reality constructed by Jim Jones, the act of mass suicide for the sake of socialism actually made perfect logical sense to them.
Okay, I need to push back on this right out of the gate on behalf of anyone listening.
Sure.
It is incredibly easy to look at a tragedy of this magnitude and immediately label the perpetrators as monsters.
Right.
Because that label acts as a vital emotional firewall. It protects us. It reinforces the idea that they are monsters, we are normal, and therefore this type of manipulation could never happen to us.
Which is a very natural human reaction.
Right. So you are suggesting we have to completely dismantle that firewall. We're supposed to look at how a seemingly utopian vision turned into a death cult and actively try to empathize with the internal logic of the people who participated in the murder of children.
Well, dismantling the firewall is the only way to actually learn anything from this. I mean, empathy does not mean endorsement.
Okay, that's a good distinction.
Verstehen is an analytical tool. If we do not understand their internal logic, we just dismiss Jonestown as an anomaly, like a freak occurrence.
But it wasn't.
No, it was not an anomaly. It was the result of a highly systematic, observable process of resocialization. To understand how a movement ends in a mass grave in a South American jungle clearing, we have to look at the psychological soil where the seed was planted.
Right, which means we need to go back to the beginning.
We do. We have to travel back to a dirt road town in Depression-era Indiana.
1931.
Yeah.
Lynn, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
James Warren Jones is born into a situation that is utterly bleak. Even by the standards of the Great Depression, this is bad.
Yeah, it was incredibly tough.
His father, James Thurman Jones, was a disabled World War I veteran. He suffered from severe breathing difficulties resulting from a mustard gas attack in the trenches.
He was largely incapacitated.
Unable to hold down steady work. And on top of that, he was an active member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Right. So the family lived in crushing poverty. By 1934, they were evicted from their home and forced to move into this tiny shack with no plumbing and no electricity.
Wow.
Food was scarce, to the point where they frequently had to forage in the nearby woods just to survive.
And then you add his mother, Lynetta, to this environment.
Mm.
The source material, like multiple biographers, describe her as a woman entirely devoid of natural maternal instincts.
Yeah, she was very disconnected from it.
She was forced to work outside the home in factories, doing odd jobs just to keep the family from starving. And this left young Jim completely neglected.
He was on his own.
He was known to wander the streets of this small town entirely unsupervised, sometimes walking around naked. I mean, he was fundamentally an outcast from the moment he could walk.
Well, the local neighbors took pity on him, obviously. They'd step in to feed and clothe him. However, they uniformly noted that he was a highly unusual, deeply unsettling child.
Unsettling how?
Very early on, he developed this morbid obsession with religion, authority, and death.
Like beyond normal kid stuff.
Oh, absolutely. He would visit a local casket manufacturer just to watch them work.
Whoa.
And he collected roadkill from the streets and held these elaborate mock funerals for the dead animals in his barn.
Okay, there's a widely circulated story in the sources from a neighbor who claimed they witnessed Jones actually kill a cat with a knife, specifically so he could have a fresh body to hold a funeral for.
Yeah, that detail really highlights the disturbing nature of his fixations.
And if the other neighborhood kids refused to attend these macabre little ceremonies, he wouldn't cancel them. He would just stand there and perform the funeral alone.
Just trying to picture that level of isolation in a child is chilling.
It really is.
It paints a picture of a profoundly lonely kid who craved the structure, the family, and the attention that he was entirely denied at home.
So what does he do with that void?
This void drove him to the local library. He became a voracious reader, but he wasn't reading children's books, you know? He spent hours soaking up biographies of Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, Mahatma Gandhi.
That is quite a reading list for a kid.
Yeah. He was captivated by the concept of absolute power. He studied how these figures commanded masses. He was particularly fascinated by the pomp, the absolute cohesion, and the dictatorial control inherent in fascism.
Right. I read that he would actually force the neighborhood kids to goose-step together in his yard.
He did.
And he would physically beat the ones who stepped out of line or disobeyed his orders. He even made a habit of shouting, "Heil Hitler," at passing German prisoners of war who were being transported through the area.
It's incredibly dark. But here is the critical pivot in his development.
Okay.
Despite his father's active membership in the Ku Klux Klan, and despite his own dark fascination with fascist dictators, Jones develops a fierce, lifelong hatred of racism.
Which is such a paradox.
It is the defining paradox of his early life. The genesis of this anti-racism stems from a profound incident where he attended a baseball game in Richmond, Indiana.
What happened?
He witnessed blatant, humiliating discrimination against the black attendees at the stadium. It deeply disturbed him. It disturbed him so much that he brought the issue home, resulting in a massive falling out with his father.
His dad, the KKK member.
Right. His father explicitly forbade one of Jim's black friends from entering their house. Jim refused to accept this, and the two essentially did not speak for years.
Looking at his childhood through the lens of Verstein, like you mentioned earlier, it seems he wasn't just aimlessly absorbing these ideas. He was acting more like an ideological architect.
That's a great way to look at it.
He's building a structural framework from scrap parts to survive his own emotional poverty. Like, he took the absolute, unquestioned authority of fascism, the sweeping economic vision of communism, and the theatrical, commanding power of Pentecostal religion, and he meticulously stitched them all together.
That is a very precise way to frame it. He realized very early on that religion was the ultimate mechanism for control.
Especially in a small Midwestern town.
Exactly. Religion was the only socially acceptable way to gather a large group of people, command their undivided attention, and exert authority over them without being questioned.
Wow.
So while his anti-racism gave him a genuine righteous crusade to fight for, religion was simply the vehicle he would use to build the family he never had and the power he desperately craved.
But this bespoke ideological cocktail doesn't stay theoretical.
No, it doesn't.
As Jones grows up, goes to college, and eventually marries a nurse named Marceline Baldwin in 1949, he decides to put these ideas into practice. And we really need to pause on his relationship with Marceline.
We do, because it establishes the exact blueprint of manipulation he would later use on thousands of people.
He routinely ran sadistic psychological tests on her.
Yes.
He would sit her down, look her in the eye, and tell her that a close family member of hers had suddenly died. He would hold her and comfort her while she wept uncontrollably, and then, like hours later, casually admit he had made the whole thing up just to test her emotional loyalty to him.
It reveals a desperate, pathological need for absolute emotional control. He needed to prove to himself that he could break someone down and build them back up, entirely dependent on him.
That is terrifying.
And while he is perfecting this interpersonal manipulation at home, he is simultaneously attending Communist Party meetings in Indianapolis in the early 1950s.
Which is not a great time to be a communist in America.
No, the political climate was incredibly hostile to Marxism. It was the height of the Red Scare. He and his mother were repeatedly harassed by the FBI for attending these meetings.
Right.
He quickly became intensely frustrated. He realized that trying to change society or run for office as an open Marxist in 1950s America was a complete dead end.
He hits a wall politically. So he turns to Marceline and makes this stunning admission. He asks her, "How can I demonstrate my Marxism?"
And his solution to this problem is brilliant in an incredibly cynical way.
His answer is, infiltrate the church.
He begins executing this plan in 1952, taking a position as a student pastor at a Methodist church in Indianapolis.
But that doesn't last long, right?
No, he entered with a genuine desire to racially integrate the congregation. However, the Methodist leadership firmly forbade him from bringing African Americans into the church.
So he just leaves.
He immediately leaves. He realizes that the mainstream Protestant denominations possess too much existing bureaucracy. They are too rigid and too conservative for him to co-opt.
He needs a blank slate.
He needs a different platform, one that is malleable and relies entirely on the charisma of the leader.
And he finds that exact platform in the Pentecostal latter rain movement. For context, this is the 1950s healing revival era. We're talking about massive tent revivals, traveling faith healers, and congregations primed for emotional catharsis.
To understand why this environment was perfect for Jones, we have to look at the mechanics of a healing revival. These were not quiet, contemplative church services.
No, definitely not.
They were highly charged, sensory, overwhelming events. The music was loud, the preaching was frenetic, and the entire atmosphere was designed to induce a state of heightened emotional suggestibility.
Right, the adrenaline is pumping.
In that environment, the social pressure to experience a miracle is immense. When a charismatic leader touches someone and tells them they are healed, the adrenaline and the expectation often create a psychosomatic response. People temporarily feel better, and the crowd accepts it as divine proof.
So Jones studies this ecosystem and teams up with a very prominent, highly successful faith healer named William Branham.
Branham was a master of the form.
He publicly endorses Jones as a prophet, lending him immediate credibility in that world. And just like that, Jones's tiny, struggling congregation, which at one point was so broke, he was literally selling pet monkeys door to door to fund it, explodes to 1,000 people.
Branham was a crucial mentor. Jones carefully studied Branham's specific techniques, how he would call out people's names from the audience, state their addresses, list their private ailments, and then pronounce them healed.
But how did Branham know all that?
Well, Jones immediately adopted these methods, incorporating cold reading techniques and utilizing informants to gather information on the congregation beforehand.
Oh, wow. It's all parlor trick.
But Branham was only half of the equation. Jones also sought out an African-American spiritual leader based in Philadelphia known as Father Divine.
Father Divine was a fascinating, controversial figure who led the peace mission movement.
Yeah.
He basically claimed to be God walking on earth.
He did, and mainstream religious leaders heavily criticized him for it. But Jones saw the effectiveness of his model.
He paid attention to what worked.
He visited Father Divine multiple times. He studied the peace mission structure. He copied their model of communal living where members pooled their resources.
Right.
He copied their strategy of setting up soup kitchens and providing free, high-quality groceries to the poor. Father Divine proved that if you provide for the material survival of marginalized people, they will grant you immense spiritual authority.
That makes total sense.
Eventually, Jones would also copy Father Divine's explicit claims of personal divinity.
But here is where the narrative becomes incredibly difficult to reconcile.
It does.
Because at this early stage in Indianapolis, Jones is using this growing power to do objectively transformative things. He gets appointed as the director of the local Human Rights Commission.
Yes.
He sets up sting operations to catch racist restaurant owners violating civil rights laws. He personally integrates churches, the local telephone company, the police department, and an amusement park.
His actions were incredibly bold.
He even desegregates the Methodist hospital by checking himself in as a patient, refusing to leave the black ward, and literally making beds and emptying bedpans for black patients until the hospital administration finally caved to the political pressure and integrated the facility.
To an outside observer in 1950s Indiana, Jones's actions aligned perfectly with the genuine heroes of the civil rights movement. He was actively destroying segregation at great personal risk.
Because there was real backlash, right?
Oh, white supremacists aggressively targeted his church, which he had named the People's Temple. They painted swastikas on the building. They threw a stick of dynamite into their coal pile.
Good Lord.
They threw a dead cat at his house, yet Jones did not back down. He and Marceline formed what he proudly called a rainbow family, adopting children of various racial backgrounds. They were legally the first white couple in the state of Indiana to adopt a black child.
This is the massive contradiction that trips people up. He is doing the hard, physically dangerous work of integration. How do we reconcile the man who risks his life to integrate a hospital ward with the man who is simultaneously standing in a tent, hiding chicken gizzards in his hands to fake cancer healings, actively tricking vulnerable people into following him?
Well, applying Verstehen here is essential.
Okay, walk me through it.
How did Jones and his inner circle who helped him fake these miracles justify the deception? They justified it because in their constructed moral framework, the ends absolutely justified the means.
Right.
Jones fundamentally believed that a socialist, egalitarian society was the only moral way for humanity to live. He viewed traditional religion as the opiate of the masses, a tool used by capitalists to keep the working class docile.
So he just turned it around on them.
Exactly. If he had to use that exact same opiate to trick the masses into accepting a socialist utopia, he viewed that as a necessary noble lie. The inner circle faking the healings knew there was no magic, but they believed in the social mission.
The followers weren't joining a suicide cult.
No, they were flocking to a radical, fully integrated community that was actively feeding the poor and fighting the Ku Klux Klan.
He lured them in with tangible social progress, but that progressive utopia was built on a foundation of total manipulation.
It is a very precarious foundation.
So if he is this successful in Indiana, why does he leave? The shift happens as the 1960s arrive, fueled by his growing paranoia. He reads a 1962 article in Esquire magazine that details the safest places on Earth to survive a nuclear apocalypse.
And it completely terrifies him.
He drags his family to Brazil for a brief period, returns, and then tells his congregation that Indianapolis is going to be wiped out in an imminent nuclear holocaust. He declares they have to move.
The nuclear threat was a convenient catalyst, but sociologically, the move served a much darker purpose. He needed to isolate them.
Right, physically separate them.
Moving the temple to Redwood Valley, California, near Ukiah in 1965 accomplished two critical goals. First, it physically removed his followers from their extended families, their jobs, and their social support networks in Indiana, making them entirely dependent on the temple for survival.
And the second goal.
Second, moving to the progressive counterculture of 1960s, California allowed Jones to finally drop the facade of traditional Christianity.
Because once they established themselves in California, he introduces a theology he calls Apostolic Socialism.
Right. He stops hiding his Marxist leanings.
He begins openly attacking the Bible during his sermons, denouncing it as a tool written by men to justify the oppression of women and minorities. He mocks the traditional Christian God, referring to him as a sky god who won't magically appear to help you pay your rent or feed your children.
It's a complete paradigm shift for the congregation.
And, having systematically destroyed their existing religious foundation, he steps into the void he just created. He stands before his congregation and declares, "I am come as God's socialist."
This represents the total crystallization of the resocialization process.
Break that down for me.
Resocialization is the deliberate dismantling of an individual's old reality and the systematic construction of a new one. Jones systematically severed their ties to traditional religion, to the capitalist economy, and to their biological family.
They had to give up everything, right?
Everything. He instituted a policy requiring members to turn over their income, the deeds to their properties, and their life savings to the temple.
Wow.
In exchange, the temple provided room, board, and a highly structured community. They were now fully enclosed within Jim Jones's reality.
To maintain absolute control over this new reality, the theatrical deception escalated to absurd levels. We mentioned the chicken gizzards earlier. The specific mechanic of that trick involved members of his inner circle pretending to be sick, going through the public healing line, and then pretending to cough up or pass a bloody tumor.
Which was just animal guts palmed by Jones.
But the psychological manipulation grew much darker than parlor tricks. Look at the case of Irene Mason.
That's a really harrowing example.
Jones secretly drugged her. While she was unconscious, his aides placed a medical cast on her arm. When she woke up groggy and confused, they convinced her she had fallen and broken it.
Just completely manufactured a trauma.
Days later, during a highly attended service, Jones dramatically removed the cast, manipulated her perfectly healthy arm, and claimed he had instantly healed the fracture.
We have to ask why he went to such elaborate, bizarre lengths. He wasn't just performing magic tricks to solicit donations anymore.
What was the point then?
He was executing a closed-loop psychological algorithm. He was proving that reality itself was whatever Jim Jones dictated. He utilized a network of aides who would secretly snoop through members' medicine cabinets, dig through their trash, and listen to their private conversations.
Spying on his own people.
Exactly. Jones would then use this gathered intel during services to perform clairvoyant readings. He successfully convinced them he was omniscient.
And once he establishes that he is all-knowing and the sole provider of their physical and spiritual survival, the abuse escalates horrifically.
It becomes incredibly dark.
He instituted forced abortions for women in the temple. He coerced sexual favors from female members and actively raped male members of the congregation. She then forced the victims to stand up in front of the congregation and admit they were homosexual, while Jones simultaneously claimed that he was the only true heterosexual in the universe.
Again, Verstein requires us to ask, how did a congregation founded on progressive egalitarianism accept and rationalize sexual assault?
That's the million-dollar question. How do they...
Jones weaponized socialist rhetoric to justify the abuse. He framed traditional family units and monogamous relationships as bourgeois attachments that distracted from the collective socialist mission.
So if you loved your spouse, you were being a bad socialist.
Exactly. By sexually dominating both the men and women and by forcing abortions, he was systematically breaking the biological family unit. He was ensuring that their primary loyalty, their only true emotional attachment, was to him and the temple collective.
It is akin to boiling a frog. But Jones was adjusting the thermostat using the followers' own deepest moral convictions against them.
That's precisely it.
You essentially hack a person's moral root directory. Once you have admin access to their definition of what good and evil means, you can justify anything.
You can rewrite their entire worldview.
And the most terrifying part of this entire story is that it wasn't just the isolated, vulnerable followers who bought into this constructed reality. The political elite of California bought it completely.
They absolutely did.
By the early 1970s, Jones expanded the temple's operations, eventually moving the main headquarters to San Francisco. To the outside world, to the politicians and the press, People's Temple looked like an incredibly effective, highly disciplined, progressive organization.
They boasted thousands of members. They ran successful drug rehabilitation programs, extensive soup kitchens, and free medical clinics for seniors. Most importantly for the politicians, the temple represented a massive, highly mobilized voting bloc.
Jones could guarantee hundreds of enthusiastic volunteers to hand out flyers, knock on doors, or pack a political rally at a moment's notice.
Which is currency in politics.
Because he controlled this labor force, he became deeply embedded in the San Francisco political machine. He provided crucial support to elect George Moscone as mayor, and Moscone rewarded that loyalty by appointing Jones as the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority Commission.
That is a significant position of power.
He enjoyed the vocal, public support of powerful figures like State Assemblyman Willie Brown. Harvey Milk spoke at his rallies. He even secured private meetings with vice presidential candidate Walter Mondale and First Lady Rosalind Carter.
He was entirely insulated by this political armor. State Assemblyman Willie Brown once publicly stated at a dinner honoring Jones that he was a combination of Martin Luther King Jr., Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, and Chairman Mao.
I mean, that is just incredible praise.
Imagine being a follower inside the temple, starting to experience doubts about the abuse or the bizarre late-night meetings. That level of intense public validation from respected mainstream political leaders makes it nearly impossible to trust your own instincts.
Because you think, well, if the First Lady likes him.
Right. If the First Lady of the United States respects this man, who are you, an ordinary citizen, to doubt his divinity?
Wait, I'm stuck here. This is a massive strategic contradiction.
Yes.
You just established that he had the mayor of San Francisco in his pocket, he had police protection, and he had the political establishment defending him. He possesses immense political armor. Why on earth would he abandon the center of his power to go hack an agricultural farm out of a miserable South American jungle?
It seems like a colossal strategic error, right?
It really does.
It was a decision born purely of panic and paranoia. His political armor was strong, but it wasn't impenetrable. Defectors who managed to escape the temple's grip started talking to the press.
So the truth was leaking out.
Journalists began digging past the soup kitchens and looking into the financial extortion and physical beatings. The breaking point arrived in August 1977. A magazine called New West was preparing to publish an explosive, meticulously researched exposé written by Marshall Kilduff.
What was in the article?
The article detailed the brutal physical punishments, the financial coercion, and explicitly called out the fake healings. Jones received advance warning that the article was dropping.
And he knew he couldn't spin it.
He knew the political establishment would abandon him once the abuse was public. He panicked, and he triggered a mass, immediate exodus to a remote tract of land they had leased in the Cooperative Socialist Republic of Guyana. They called it Jonestown.
He sold this move to the congregation as a permanent escape to his socialist paradise, like a lush sanctuary completely free from the racism, the capitalism, and the creeping fascism of the United States.
But the physical reality of the People's Temple agricultural project was a brutal nightmare.
Yeah, the sources say the soil in that specific region of Guyana was incredibly poor and acidic. It required constant back-breaking manual labor just to grow basic subsistence crops like cassava.
And when the main influx of nearly 1,000 members suddenly arrived in 1977 fleeing the New West article, the infrastructure was nowhere near ready to support them.
The conditions were designed to break the human spirit. The followers were forced to work in the fields for initially 11.5 hours a day in the oppressive, sweltering jungle heat.
Their diet was atrocious, consisting primarily of rice, beans, and watery rice soup.
Occasionally, they might receive a single egg or a cookie as a reward on a Sunday. Meanwhile, Jones maintained his own private stash of food, eating meat and refrigerated goods, claiming he required a special diet for his blood sugar.
But the physical labor and malnutrition were only the baseline of their subjugation. The true torture was the psychological bombardment.
He wired the entire compound with a network of massive loudspeakers. Jones would broadcast his voice over these speakers on a constant, inescapable loop day and night.
Just relentless.
He would preach, he would rant, and he would read heavily edited news dispatches from Radio Moscow, constantly framing the United States as a collapsing imperialist villain while praising the Soviet Union. The followers were chronically sleep-deprived.
Terry Buford O'Shea, one of the survivors who managed to defect before the end, recalled a chilling conversation with Jones. She quoted him as saying, "Let's keep them poor and tired, because if they're poor, they can't escape, and if they're tired, they can't make plans."
He weaponized their biological exhaustion.
It was the ultimate inescapable isolation. Back in California, if a member somehow broke through the psychological conditioning, they could physically walk out the door, find a payphone, or go to a police station.
But in Jonestown,
They were surrounded by miles of dense, impenetrable jungle. They were in a foreign country where Jones had heavily bribed the local government officials to ignore his activities.
he confiscated everyone's passports upon arrival.
Yes. He controlled all incoming and outgoing mail. He created a completely closed, hermetically sealed system where his paranoid delusions became their only available reality.
And his paranoia was spiraling completely out of control. He was abusing a massive daily cocktail of Valium, Quaaludes, dangerous stimulants, and barbiturates.
His physical health was rapidly deteriorating. He could barely walk without assistance on some days.
And the outside world, the reality he tried to escape, refused to leave him alone. Specifically, a coalition formed back in California called the Concerned Relatives.
Right. This group consisted of defectors who had escaped and family members of people trapped in Jonestown. They were led by a couple named Tim and Grace Stone.
The Stones are the specific catalyst for the final tragedy, aren't they?
They really are. Tim Stone had been the temple's top attorney, a high-ranking member of the inner circle, and Grace was his wife. However, Grace had given birth to a child, John Victor Stone, and Jim Jones publicly claimed to be the boy's biological father, forcing Tim to sign an affidavit agreeing to it.
Wow.
When Grace finally defected, she was forced to leave the child behind. Jones smuggled the boy to Guyana. Tim eventually defected as well, and the two launched a massive, highly publicized legal battle to get their son back.
And this custody battle over John Victor Stone became an absolute consuming obsession for Jones. It fundamentally broke his grip on reality.
He became convinced that the U.S. government, directed by the CIA, was going to launch a military raid on the Jonestown compound specifically to take the boy back.
This specific localized fear birthed one of the most horrifying psychological conditioning tactics in recorded history, the White Knights.
We have to look closely at the mechanics of the White Knights to understand the final day.
Walk us through what happened during a White Knight.
These were emergency late-night drills. Jones would sound a blaring alarm over the compound's loudspeakers in the middle of the night. He would scream that the compound was currently surrounded by CIA mercenaries or the Guyanese military.
Just creating sheer panic.
He told them the invasion had begun and that the soldiers were coming to systematically torture their elders and butcher their children. Armed temple guards, wielding shotguns and crossbows, would surround the central pavilion. The entire exhausted, terrified community was forced to gather.
Once they were surrounded by armed guards, he would hand out cups of liquid. He would tell the congregation it was poison. He preached that the only way to protest this fascist invasion, the only way to deny their enemies the sick satisfaction of capturing and torturing them, was to commit an act of revolutionary suicide. He forced them to drink the liquid, adults and young children alike.
And they would sit there in the dark jungle, weeping, holding their children, waiting for the poison to take effect.
And then, after 45 agonizing minutes, Jones would smile from his chair and announce, it was just a loyalty test.
Let's apply Verstay into this horror. From a sociological and psychological standpoint, this is the absolute darkest form of classical conditioning.
Because he's rewiring their brains about death?
Exactly. By rehearsing their own deaths over and over again, Jones systematically normalized the act of suicide. He desensitized them to the biological terror of dying. He successfully fused their religious devotion with Marxist revolutionary rhetoric, framing suicide not as an act of despair or defeat, but as the ultimate triumphant act of political defiance.
It's an agonizing, weaponized application of the boy who cried wolf.
It is.
You run the drill so many times that when the actual lethal poison is finally handed out, the followers are almost completely numb to the reality of it. The drill seamlessly, imperceptibly transitions into the horrific reality.
And the event that forced that final transition arrived in November 1978.
Congressman Leo Ryan.
Yes, a representative from California. Spurred by the relentless lobbying and legal pressure from the concerned relatives, Congressman Ryan decided to lead a physical fact-finding mission to Jonestown to investigate the allegations of human rights abuses himself.
He wasn't taking no for an answer.
He assembled a delegation that included journalists, an NBC camera crew, and several members of the concerned relatives. They landed in Guyana and arrived at the heavily guarded compound on November 17th.
Initially, Jones tried to manage the optics. He put on a show. They hosted a large reception in the pavilion that evening, featuring live music, dancing, and a feast that the members hadn't seen in months. He tried to project the image of a happy, thriving, socialist paradise.
But the facade cracked almost immediately.
Yeah. During the reception, a desperate temple member named Vernon Gosney managed to secretly slip a written note to NBC reporter Don Harris. The note simply listed two names and begged for help to escape the compound.
Word of the note quickly spread to Jones, and the underlying tension in the compound absolutely exploded.
The gig was up.
The following day, November 18th, as Congressman Ryan was concluding his tour and preparing to leave, the reality of the situation broke open. Several temple members bravely stepped forward and publicly stated they wanted to leave with the congressman.
Ultimately, 15 temple members decided to defect right then and there.
Jones was visibly unraveling. His hands were shaking. He was muttering to himself. He initially told the defectors they were free to go, though he viewed it as the ultimate betrayal.
But then it gets violent.
As Ryan was finalizing the departure, a loyal temple member attacked the congressman with a knife, attempting to slit his throat.
Oh my God.
Ryan survived the attack with minor injuries, but the delegation, now fully aware of the danger, rushed to the trucks to head to the nearby Port Kaituma airstrip and board their planes.
But they did make it out. Jones, fully consumed by paranoia and feeling his absolute control shattering, dispatched a squad of his heavily armed guards, known as the Red Brigade, to follow them on a tractor.
It was an ambush.
As the defectors, the journalists, and the congressmen were actively boarding a twin-engine Otter aircraft on the tarmac, the tractor pulled up. The guards opened fire with rifles and shotguns at point-blank range.
They assassinated Congressman Leo Ryan on the tarmac.
They murdered 3 journalists, including the NBC cameraman Bob Brown, who incredibly kept his camera rolling, filming his own executioners as he was shot down.
Just staggering bravery.
They killed one of the defectors. Several others, including Ryan's aide, future Congresswoman Jackie Speier, were severely wounded, shot multiple times, and forced to play dead or flee into the surrounding jungle to survive.
The airstrip ambush was the absolute point of no return. Jones remained at the compound and received word via shortwave radio that the assassination had occurred. But crucially, he was told that some of the delegation had survived and fled.
So he knows it's over.
He knew immediately what this meant. He knew the survivors would contact the United States military. He knew that within hours, armed military helicopters would be swarming the Jonestown compound. The constructed reality he had built was collapsing. He had completely cornered himself.
And so he called the final white knight.
He did.
Which brings us to the most harrowing piece of source material we have. The death tape, officially designated as FBI evidence Q042. This is 45-minute audio recording recovered from the scene, recorded on a standard cassette deck near Jones's chair.
It preserves exactly, second by second, how Jim Jones orchestrated the deaths of over 900 people.
It is agonizing to listen to, but analyzing it is essential for understanding how the ideological trap finally snapped shut on that community. Jones has cornered himself. He's rehearsed this moment dozens of times. So when the real threat finally arrives, how does he transition a drill into an actual massacre? That exact mechanism is captured on the recording.
The tape begins with Jones calling the assembly. Listen to the cadence of his voice. He doesn't start by screaming. He speaks in this exhausted, almost sorrowful, deeply manipulative tone.
He's playing the victim.
He informs the crowd about the violence at the airstrip. He actively lies to them, claiming he didn't order the attack, saying, "I don't know who fired the shot. I don't know who killed the congressman."
Unbelievable.
But then he uses that violence to frame the inevitable consequence. He tells them one of the few on that plane is going to shoot the pilot. Down comes that plane into the jungle. He paints a picture of inevitable disaster.
And then he explicitly frames the incoming threat. He looks at the parents in the crowd and tells them that the invading Guyanese and American soldiers will literally butcher their children, that they will torture their seniors.
He traps them in a horrific binary choice. Be brutally tortured by fascist soldiers or die with dignity on your own terms.
He tells the crowd, if we can't live in peace, then we must die in peace. And then he deploys the exact phrase he's been drilling into their minds during the White Nights for months. We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide protesting the conditions of an inhumane world.
But the Q042 tape reveals something absolutely crucial that shatters the myth of the brainwashed cult. There was resistance.
Wait, really? Someone stood up to him?
Yes. It was not a monolithic group of blindly obedient zombies. A woman named Christine Miller stands up from the crowd. She bravely, incredibly, voices her dissent. She engages Jim Jones in a desperate debate for her life and the lives of the children, all while surrounded by armed guards holding crossbows and shotguns.
Her bravery is just staggering. She systematically tries to find any logical loophole to save them. She first asks, is it too late for Russia? Because Jones had previously repeatedly promised the congregation that if things got bad, they would seamlessly emigrate to the Soviet Union.
Right. And when Jones shoots that down, arguing that Russia won't take them now that they are recognized as murderers, she pushes back again.
She states plainly, I feel like as long as there's life, there's hope. And then she targets the most horrific part of his plan. She says, I look at all the babies and I think they deserve to live.
We have to analyze exactly how Jones dismantles her arguments. He doesn't yell at her to sit down. He uses a calm, twisted, patronizing logic. When she talks about the babies, he counters by telling her that the children deserve peace, not the torture of the invading forces.
Just completely twisting reality.
He says, I'm the best friend you'll ever have. He completely, philosophically rejects her individualism. When she asserts her individual right to decide her own fate, he insists they are a collective, a single organism, and they must die as one.
But here is the most disturbing part of the entire tape, the part that is so hard to comprehend. Jim Jones doesn't have to silence Christine Miller. The crowd turns on her.
They do.
Other members of the congregation aggressively shout her down. You can hear a woman yelling at her, furiously stating that Christine only has her life because of Jim Jones. A man angrily tells her that the children are better off dead right now than growing up to be dummies in a racist, capitalist world. The innate human instinct for survival was clearly present in Christine, but the crowd actively suppressed it. How do we explain this? How much of this crowd reaction was genuinely shared belief in revolutionary suicide, and how much of it was just the fact that they were completely biologically exhausted, trapped in a jungle, and staring at men with guns?
Well, it was an inseparable, fatal blend of all those factors. This is where Waitman's sociological analysis is absolutely vital. We must view that moment through the lens of Verstein.
Right. How did it make sense to them?
Within the specific, heavily conditioned social reality that Jones had constructed over a decade, the crowd's reaction actually makes internal sense. To us, to the outside world, shouting down a woman who is begging for the lives of infants is pure, unadulterated madness.
Absolute madness.
But to the deeply conditioned members of the People's Temple, this moment was the culmination of their political and religious existence. They genuinely believed the capitalist world was irredeemable. They genuinely believed, because they had been told it thousands of times, that the CIA was coming to torture them.
So the poison was an escape.
In their constructed reality, taking the poison was a rational way of denying the enemy a victory. You can hear it on the tape. As the poison is being prepared, people step up to the microphone. One woman says, "It's been a pleasure walking with all of you in this revolutionary struggle." They were literally thanking him for the opportunity to die.
The mechanics of the end are brutal. They bring out a large metal vat, they fill it with grape flavor aid, and they lace it with a lethal, massive mix of potassium cyanide, Valium, chloral hydrate, and other heavy sedatives. And then Jones issues the final tactical order. The children must be killed first.
From a perspective of absolute control, it is the most brutal, effective, tactical decision he could possibly make.
Because once the kids are gone.
By forcing the parents to administer the poison to their own children first, he instantly eliminated any remaining reason for the parents to continue living. Odell Rhodes, one of the incredibly few survivors who managed to physically slip away into the jungle during the chaotic final moments, described the scene.
What does he say?
Parents watched their children die. And it was not a peaceful sleep. The cyanide caused severe convulsions, muscle spasms, and agonizing pain, completely contradicting Jones's promises that it was a painless transition. Once the parents witnessed the death of their children, they simply stepped up in despair to take the poison themselves.
The cries and screams of the children reacting to the poison are clearly audible in the background of the tape. And as the natural biological panic of death finally starts to set in among the crowd, Jones gets agitated. His mask slips. He tells them to stop the hysterics. He scolds them, saying, "This is not the way for people who are socialists or communists to die. We must die with some dignity."
He is literally micromanaging the aesthetics of their deaths to fit his ideological script until the very final breath.
276 children were murdered that day. 909 people died in total in that compound. Eventually, the armed guards drank the poison as well. And Jim Jones. He did not drink the flavor aid. He was found near his chair with a gunshot wound to the head, which investigators believe was either self-inflicted or carried out by a final loyal aide on his specific orders.
The massacre at Jonestown was the greatest single loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until the events of September 11th. It completely, irrevocably destroyed the utopian dream the followers had sought, leaving behind only a legacy of absolute horror.
Let's synthesize this. A profoundly neglected boy who held bizarre mock funerals for dead animals in a dirt-poor Indiana town, grew up to build a movement. And to an outside observer, that movement did immense tangible social good. They physically desegregated hospitals, they fed the starving, they openly fought the Ku Klux Klan.
They really did.
But he systematically twisted that exact same movement into a paranoid, abusive, isolated dictatorship. He built a bespoke reality entirely from scratch just so he could be the undisputed god of it. And the moment that reality was threatened by the outside world, he murdered everyone trapped inside it.
Which brings us back to our starting point. I want you, the listener, to reflect on that phrase, drinking the Kool-Aid. When we use that phrase casually in a meeting or a conversation to mean someone is gullible or foolish, we are actively participating in an erasure.
We are erasing the victims.
We erase the horrifying mechanical reality of the physical coercion, the armed guards with crossbows, the years of systemic sleep deprivation, and the murder of almost 300 infants and children who had absolutely no choice in the matter.
That's right.
But we also erase something far more tragic. We erase the profound, genuine human desire for a better, more equal world. The people of People's Temple wanted racial equality. They wanted a fair society. Jim Jones identified that noble desire, isolated it, and weaponized it against his own people.
We all like to think that we are completely immune to radicalization. We like to think that our grip on objective reality is absolute, and that our internal alarms would save us before things went too far. But consider the mechanics we just laid out.
They are very subtle at first.
If a charismatic leader could take a group of people who simply wanted racial equality and a fair economic system, systematically isolate them in a jungle, control their diet and their sleep, and slowly warp their reality until they truly believed that murdering their own children was an act of political dignity. What does that actually say about the terrifying fragility of human belief?
It's a deeply unsettling thought.
What subtle, constructed realities are we accepting right now in our own lives simply because the people around us have mutually agreed they are true?
It is a question that demands our constant, rigorous vigilance.
Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the source material.